Hey everyone, my name is Jason and I'm a certified sommelier, and today I thought I'd take you through some of the basics of wine tasting, taste some of the wine that I've got here, and have a little fun. So let's kind of get into it. One of the things that I really love about wine, and one of the things that I want to be able to share with you today, is that two people can really enjoy the same bottle of wine in the same place and experience those wines in two different ways. And that all comes down to the technique and how you're actually tasting the wine, and everybody's palates are different. The ability to identify and taste the smells in the wines are really directly influenced on how we experience it. And the beauty of wine is being able to share those experiences with those around us. Tasting wine includes different techniques that are really accessible to everybody. And today I'm going to take you through some of those very basic techniques. By definition, there's two different types of tastings. There's a horizontal tasting and a vertical tasting. Horizontal tasting brings together wines from the same vintage in one area. So a good example of that could be 3 wines from 2016, all from Napa Valley. The really objective here is to look more at the vintage and the terroir to better understand the overall style of the particular vintage. And then the vertical tasting brings together several vintages of the same growth. And for me, this is my favorite type of tasting, and it really requires a little bit more of a tuned palate, but can be a lot of fun with a little practice. And a good example of this would be 3 wines from the same producer across multiple years. So let's say 2010, 2011, 2012. And what you really want to do is always start there with the youngest wine and then work to the oldest. Ideally, you want to set your tasting schedule outside of meals, so don't sit down and do a full tasting with your dinner. It's going to kind of blow your palate out of order. You really just want to focus on the wine itself. If you are having a party or a gathering and you want to put out some cheese or crackers, make sure that those are going to pair with your wine and they're not really working against the flavors that you're planning to taste. Try to stay away from things that are inherently spicy. That'll really kill the palate. Glassware. So I've got 2 different types of stemware in front of me right now. Let's see if you can have a look at those. The first one is a white wine glass. These are from Schatzweissel. These are some of my favorite style glasswares, and what you can see is that they've got a very big bulb at the bottom and it tapers up to the top here, and this allows the flavor profile to kind of concentrate at the top of the glass. And the same thing on this side. This is a Pinot Noir or a red wine glass, specifically designed more so for Pinot Noir, but or more Burgundian style wines. And again, the same thing here. You've got the larger bowl at the bottom, which the taper top, and that again directs a lot of that aroma to where you can allow it to concentrate at the top. So that's where you're going to get the best taste in the wine, as well as the aroma. For a normal wine tasting, about 1.5 inches inch and a half will work for you. It's sufficient. You don't want to over pour. You want to leave enough room in the glass for the flavors to really concentrate. And then the other thing that I would suggest too is just a plain white piece of paper. And this will allow you to set the wine against that, so you have a neutral background to be able to see the color palette that you're going to be discovering in that wine. So those things there. And then what I always keep handy too is a cloth. So these are polishing cloths. So you can get them from Amazon, you can get them from wherever you want, wine stores. But always make sure you've got a very nice crystal clear glass, free of aromas. And I always wipe those just before tasting anyway. So the 3 stages to the wine tasting, right? The first is going to be your visual or sight. The second is going to be the smell. And then the third is probably the funnest, it's the taste, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to pour some of this wine. We're going to kind of talk to the process a little bit and then go from there, right? So we've got today, this is Lucien Albrecht. This is 2016 Pinot Gris from Alsace, and this is one of my more favorite regions to visit for white wines. Alsace is on the German border, just next to France. I've got my map over here because I always like to kind of know where I am strategically, but you've got Strasbourg, that's just at the very top. And then you've got Colmar, which is kind of the headquarters there of Alsace. And then just to the west, no, excuse me, to the east, to the left of Colmar, is where you'll find most of that wine growing region. And then to the right of that is the Rhine that follows Germany all the way down as you go into Switzerland. So really great area to visit. If you haven't been there, it's definitely on one of those top 2, top 3 places to visit in terms of French grape varietals. This is Pinot Gris, as I mentioned. Pinot Gris is a light colored grape. It's actually got a gray skin to it. Darkens a little bit as it starts to ripen, but some really, really great flavor profiles here. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this. So I guess a little bit more about Lucien, right? Their grapes are 100% hand harvested. They use a soft press or a pneumatic press. That's basically a bladder press. And what that does is it's a very long tube. The grapes are, after they're hand sorted, they're pushed in, and then an inert gas actually increases this balloon, which presses against the grapes and gives it a very soft, gentle approach to pressing, so that the stems, if they're in there, or the skin on the grape doesn't overly come in contact with the juice in a rough way. So that's their way of doing it. It's a little bit of a softer approach than a basket press. The tannins are not as strong when you're using a pneumatic press or a bladder press. They ferment in 100% stainless steel. And then typically in the Pinot Gris aroma range, you're going to get things like apricot, hazelnut, light toasting. On the palate, you're going to get a lot of stone fruit, some peach, some mango, some of the other yellow fruits. Yeah, so let's continue with the process here, right? So we pour ourselves a nice glass, and we'll get into kind of the sight of this, right? So the color of the wine and its intensity changes as the wine starts to come in contact with oxygen. So when we're looking at color, it's typically a good indicator of the age of the wine. Young red wines tend to have a purple sheen to it. With white wines, as they develop, they start to get a little bit more dark in color, so you start to get a deeper yellow, which is why characteristically the color of this wine will kind of help gauge the age of it. This is a 2016, so it's going to start to be a little bit darker than, like, just say 2018 would be. And that's kind of where we are able to use that white paper to really start to pull that color out. What we want to do here is we want to look at the clarity of the wine. The clarity is basically just looking for some transparency and a lack of cloudiness. This is in my face, I'm sorry about that. If the wine tends to have some particles at the bottom of the bottle, this usually is a good suggestion to decant the wine. This is a white, it does not need to be decanted. If this were 2002, 2004 Chablis, maybe, I would say throw that in the decanter for 45 minutes. But you should be okay with this wine, and it's actually got a screw cap on it, so you're ready to go on here. No fuss there. Some reds, and more frequently whites, Chardonnay, like I mentioned, are not being filtered before they're bottling. Albrecht does a very nice refining filter. But in this case, they result in a cloudy appearance, and sometimes it's intentional from the winemaker if they unfilter it. The last thing we want to look for here is the brightness or the radiance of the color. This helps reveal a bit of the sharpness due to some acidity. The Alsatian Pinot Gris have a very nice high level of acidity, not as much as a Sauvignon Blanc might, but it's a good level of acidity in this here. A bright appearance typically will give you a pronounced level of acidity and talk to the youthfulness of the wine. And then on the other hand, if a wine is unshiny in color, it starts to point to a wine that's a little bit older in age. All right, so we've kind of gone through that. So let's look at the wine here, right? You want to hold the glass by the base because you don't want to heat up the glass here, and you don't want to add any shadows or obtrusions to your wine. You want to bring the glass so that it's eye level, and then you want to be able to let the light shine through the best that it can to try to identify the intensity of the wine as the color, as the light shines through. Next thing you want to do is you want to look at the wine from above, and you're going to use that piece of paper, and you're going to tilt the glass slightly back. And what this does is actually creates what they call the disc of the wine. And you're going to be able to start to look at the vertical position of the wining and look for that colored rim as it dissipates. It'll go all the way out to clear. And we're looking for a very nice clarity. There's no obtrusions in this wine. There's no petulance in the wine. Obviously, this is a still. Petulance, you would have bubbles, so that could be from a sparkling. Cremant in Alsace it would be. Champagne if you're in Champagne, sparkling from anywhere else. And then the last thing we want to do is look for, just get this little, looking for some of those tears or the droplets or the legs on the side of the glass of the wine. This really can indicate the speed at which they slide down the glass, alcohol level, viscosity, overall richness of the wine. Now with Alsatian wines, they've got a little bit more body, a little bit more sweetness to it, so the viscosity here is going to be a little bit higher. So you may see a little bit more slower moving legs as they kind of fall down. And Alsatian Pinot Gris typically have higher level of acidity, so again, indication of higher alcohol content with the slower moving legs. 13% I believe on the Albrecht here. So again, that's going to be a little bit slower moving than Sauvignon Blanc might, right? The second stage that you're going to be looking at is going to be the smell, right? So smelling really helps to define what it is that's in the bottle of wine. This helps identify the intensity of the wine, weak, medium, strong. Is it pronounced? What is the quality of the wine? Is it straightforward? Is it elegant? Is it delicate? Is it open? Is it youthful? There are a couple different categories of aromas within the wine that you are going to kind of pay attention to. One is the primary aroma. These are the aromas of the grape itself, so of the Pinot Gris. The secondary aroma, these actually come from the wine during fermentation. And then the tertiary aromas, these appear when the wine is aged in a barrel or in bottle. These are aged on the lees in stainless steel fermentation. So you're going to start to pick up a little bit of that toasty note from being aged on the lees. If this was a Chardonnay and it was finished in, let's say, an oak cask, obviously that's going to impart a different aroma as well, whether it be French or American, depending on the producer there and what they're trying to pull out of it. Altogether, these aromas really come together and they dissolve into the bottle, and you're left with this beautiful bouquet. There are 11 aromatic families of smell. There's animal, which is kind of leather and elements of gaminess. You've got balsamic, which is like pine trees or pine nuts, kind of giving you off that nutty or that woody aroma. You've got woody in its own category, but think about this more like a pencil, shavings, a cigar box, cedar wood, really kind of that shaved pencils is just such a familiar smell. You've got a chemical smell or aroma, which is kind of more like menthol or iodine. You've got spicy. Now think of spicy like fennel or clove, spearmint, or even vanilla bean kind of falls into that category. You get that warm spice. There's, I always butcher this word, but there's emphromatic, which is actually toast or smoke. So that could be kind of giving off from the barrel itself. It could come off from the grape itself, or it could be a combination of that bouquet, right? You've got some ethers, so things like green apple. You've got floral aromas that are coming through, honeysuckle, magnolia, chamomile, things like that, that will probably pick up in some of this. You've got some fruity aromas, dried currants, sour cherries, blueberries, strawberries, some of the really nice fruitier aromas. And then you've got minerality, right? So coming from the terroir, the soil itself, like quartz or limestone, depending on where the grapes have been grown, you'll tend to get a lot of that. This happens a lot in Argentina. This happens everywhere, but a lot in Argentina, and you pick up a lot of that soil that's there. Just beautiful minerality. Same thing in Burgundy. And then the last one that you'll get is some herbaceousness, things like green bell pepper, dried leaf, grass, hay, different types of aromas that are kind of synonymous with that. The bouquet of the wine itself is really expressed by the most aromatic components, and it depends on the serving temperature and how the wine is aerated. So this is already starting to come up. The temperature is a little bit colder than I wanted it to for service, but I did that intentionally because I knew it was going to rise about 3 to 5 degrees within the glass as we were kind of going through it. So now we're going to smell the wine. We're going to smell it twice. Now I've already agitated this wine the first time. I try not to do it too much, but ideally on the first pour, let the wine sit in the glass the best that you can without moving it around. Go in for that first smell. You're going to gradually bring the glass to your nose. You want to take in the basic aromas, right, without increasing that oxidation. The first smell is going to allow us to identify the intensity and the quality of the wine. Smell, and then you're going to get those prominent aromas come through. So you get that peach. For me, I get a lot of mango, white flower, and there's just this really nice fruity aroma, but not a fruity like you would anticipate sweetness. Fruit like, again, fruit forward, that mango. Now the second smell, right? So this is where we're actually going to swirl the wine, and we're going to let the oxygen aerate the wine itself, and then we're going to go ahead and smell it. This is going to intensify the aromas, and then it's also going to reveal some of the less intense aromas. And then we'll do it a third time. This time we're going to do it with our mouth slightly open versus closed, and then that way we're able to actually bring more air in. And I'm not a very good scientist when it comes to talking about the palate itself, but I believe it allows more oxygen to come in and then smell better with your olfactory. So here we go, right? So now you're starting to pick up on those more hidden aromas. I get more floral characteristics are coming through. More white flower. And now the peach to me really, really starts to pull. Right. Okay. So very simple there. One of the things that you want to try to do at this stage, if you are looking to really advance your tasting knowledge, is try to identify 3 to 5 characteristics of this particular wine in this stage. So again, going out with those flavor profiles, the white flower, the mango, the peach. Try calling out whatever speaks to you about this wine, because as you start to develop more of the consistency in the tasting, those flavors or those aromas will become more consistent as you taste similar wines from similar regions, and it'll help you become a better taster. All right, so now we're finally ready to taste the wine. This is obviously the fun part. There's 4 basic tastes. Obviously, you've got your sweetness, your saltiness, your acidity and bitterness, and then there's a 5th, which is umami, but I don't think you're going to really get a lot of umami out of here. You know, that's more so mushrooms. Not to say that you will not taste forest floor in some wines. You'll definitely get that. Obviously not the case here, but nonetheless 4 basic tastes. The sweetness level is more defined by like pleasurable, sugary, mellow sensation. And the term mellow really more so refers to the smoothness or richness of the wine rather than the actual taste of sugar. The acidity itself is defined by a sharp characteristic of acidity, where you get the sides of the tongue that kind of tighten towards the center. And then last but not least, saltiness and bitterness are really seldomly encountered in wine, so don't expect to taste those. And then if you do, check what you're drinking. It's probably not that good at that point in time. There's also basic taste that you want to add to your sensory vocabulary. You've got things like mechanical, thermic, and chemical. So you would think of these things like rough, astringent, dry, structured, silky. These things are usually a result from tannins. In thermic, you've got warm or cold tastes depending on how the wine is served. That's very self-explanatory. And then you've got chemical, which is actually the burn or the alcohol, the bite of the wine itself. All right, so we're going to get into the fun part now that I've wasted 20 minutes of your time to simply taste this wine. So here we go. We're going to take a little bit in your mouth. We're going to move it around. We're going to let it coat the inside of the mouth so that it stimulates all the taste buds. and we're going to be able to kind of assess the overall balance of the wine. And we're going to want to find out, is the wine tannic? Is it powerful? Is it thick? Is it lively? Is it fresh? Does it have a smooth mouthfeel? And again, we want to try to identify a few of those flavors. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. Really kind of let that move around in your mouth, taking a little bit of air. So this is a very nice taste. Again, tasting that white flower, get that floral aroma. There's a very subtle hint of citrus, kind of lemony on the finish. I get a lot of that white peach flavor, a little bit of tannin, very slight tannin structure there, but it's very smooth. It has a full mouthfeel. You can feel that all the way around. It's very silky. This is a really good wine for a really good price, and this would go really well with pork, with a nice cream sauce. This would go good with chicken, and don't be shocked to put this up against some gamier meats, squab, hen, even deer or venison. This would go really well with something along those lines too. So really what you want to do again on this is look for a couple of those key flavors. Remember those aromas. Did the flavors that you tasted match up with the aromas that you smelled? Because sometimes they don't, especially when you're doing blind tasting. You'll smell a wine, you'll think it's whatever it might be, and then you go to taste the wine and you're completely wrong, and it may be something else. So it's always a good idea to give yourself a couple of those basic aromas and then basic flavors to go back and forth with. And what's important on this too is make sure you pay attention to the quality of the finish, the final sensation on the back of the mouth. That's going to let you know kind of, is the wine short? Is it medium finish? Does it have a long finish? Does it really drag out? Are you able to continually taste this wine for another 2, 3, 4 minutes after? Or is it very short? Is it 20 seconds and the wine is done? A very short finish. So try to use as many of these identifiers as you can when you're tasting through these wines. And the last thing that I just wanted to touch on too is kind of temperature. I think if the wine is served too cold, it will not express the bouquet of the wine. So you want to make sure that when you're serving it or when you're tasting it, that it's at the correct temperature. And if the wine is served obviously too warm, there's oxidation that can occur in here, and you can get some of these volatile aromas that'll come out. So ideally red wine, 59 to 65 degrees for service or storage. White wine like this, dry, 52 to 54 degrees. Rosés and sparkling, 47 to 50 degrees. You know, obviously all benchmarks, so depending on what you're drinking and where you are, obviously take into consideration some different variables. And then the last thing, and I don't have it here with me, but from decanting, right? I think we had touched on that briefly, but as a rough guide, you want to typically decant or carafe anything that's under 7 years old. A young red wine tasted right after the bottle's been opened tends to display some pleasant levels of tannin, and you could also insufficiently express some aromas in the glass, making you think that the wine is closed. So you are definitely going to want to pour out some of those heavier wines, give them a few minutes to acclimate, to introduce some of that oxygen and aerate, and then go in and taste those wines. So they're 30 to 45 minutes for just about any wine is more than enough time to get you acclimated and let some of those aromas kind of break through and start to become a good expression. I think that's about it. I think there's pretty much touched on everything. We've got the sight, the smell, the taste. We talked a little bit about the producer itself. Again, this is a Lucien Albrecht Alsatian Pinot Gris. This particular one came in at $23, $24. So it's a good price point for a good bottle of wine. And again, one of the things I actually didn't mention too, which you'll notice, most, if not all, Alsatian whites will be in the tall bottle like this. This is very indicative of Rieslings. So Rieslings, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, you'll see that typically in this bottle. And I think that's it. Oh, the last but not least for Alsace, talked about Riesling, Pinot Gris, Gewürztraminer. Muscat is the other 4 noble grapes of Alsace that are legally allowed to be planted and used in bottling. So we could always dive deeper into the particular region, the grower, the vintage, the terroir, the wine itself, but this was just meant to be kind of all-encompassing first introduction to tasting. So thanks for listening, and if you have any feedback, please let me know, and cheers.